Okay, thank you everyone very much. I think that we've had some great sessions today, and right now we have another urban agriculture session. We're very excited with Kitsap County, so I will let people introduce themselves and get out of your way.
Hi, I'm Diane Fish. I'm a resource planner at Kitsap Conservation District, and I kind of feel like the tail end of the dog here because there has been so much information on urban and community ag and sustainable small farm practices. And it hasn't always been like that. And so I'm hoping that what we're going to talk about today will be additive to your experience here and that it won't be something that you've already talked about. With me today is Teddy Kraus, who is our farm manager at the Grace Project, and he's going to be sharing some of the information about what we're doing, as well as I'm going to provide a brief overview of kind of our programming, and then Teddy's going to talk a lot about what we're doing, the real down in the dirt practices that we're using, and how we're translating those to community organizations that we work with. So the GRACE project is, it stands for Growing for Restoration, Agriculture and Conservation Education. The R's for Restorative Justice. We used to work with the Department of Corrections Community Service Work Crew from Mission Creek's Center for Women. We, since COVID, they haven't been part of our program. So we've kind of pivoted a little bit in how we're staffing our program. Right now we have Teddy as a full-time FTE, I'm 3/4 time FTE, and then we have 2 AmeriCorps that are with us 3 days a week because we share them with another organization with another one of our programs. Which way is which? Okay, so why is the clicker not working?
It was, is it just freaking out and being rude?
No. Am I too close? Am I too close?
Should just be. I might have to. Yeah.
Okay, so while we're waiting for the computer to behave itself, I'm gonna just like share briefly a little bit. We were originally what is our
I think it worked. Yep. Now
okay, now it's working. Okay, now it's working. We're in Kitsap, which for those of you who are like trying to establish where we are in the state, we're in the West Sound area next to the Salish Sea. We have the longest contiguous coastline in the nation, actually. So we have a lot of riparian areas. We have a lot of water quality issues that we focus on at the district. And so a lot of our focus in the GRACE project is like reinforcing those practices that are going to be beneficial for the environment as well as for water quality. Because as we all know, everything runs downhill to the sound. Our program was originally funded through an NACD Urban Ag Initiative in 2017. And then we received a second bite at the apple in 2020. The first round, I would say it was much more successful because the second round came in, we had a lot of opportunities planned for public outreach. We were going to be like really engaging with the community. And then we all know what happened in 2020. And so we kind of like stumbled through and we had a focus on pollinators and we managed to complete the grant. But I would have to say that it was not a shining example of success for us, but it was very valuable funding. And so here is an aerial view of what we're doing here. Of course, it was taken on a day that the wind was blowing, so our tarps are all kind of messed up. But we have a high tunnel, we have a smaller tunnel that we originally envisioned that would be partially propagation space and partially growing space, and it's turned into really be a propagation space almost full time. And then we do intensive minimal tillage and some tillage on the existing beds here. This is about 1/3 of an acre. And then out north of us, I guess, next to the road, we have about another half acre that we have under cultivation for things like squash and pumpkins and a crop rotation beds that we use. And so we've got kind of a lot of stuff going on because we're farming on almost an acre. And sometimes people ask, well, the big question is, how are you funding your program? Primarily, our funding comes from implementation funds and grants. During the period of COVID, we received some American ARPA funding, American Recovery Act funding. And I will say that as far as grants go, it was supposed to be a great thing. And it's probably been the most expensive money we've ever taken. Because billing for it has been, reimbursement has been a hassle, record keeping and documentation has been a hassle. Knowing what I know now, I probably wouldn't have taken the money, but we didn't know then. And so it was supposed to be for food security during COVID, 2021. It took us a year to write the contract, 22, 23, we started building. We're waiting on reimbursement in 2024. So that's the cautionary tale about taking grant funding. We've also been very fortunate. We've received some other funding through the Washington State Department of Commerce that provided us with AmeriCorps our first couple of years after COVID. And that has been like a really valuable part of our education as well as our community engagement mission. And then I have a couple of other small grants that work with, I partner with WSU on some farm business planning and farmland preservation stuff. Motto at the district is forming partnerships to accomplish more. And so these are just some of the organizations that we partner with in this little endeavor that we're doing. And our main partner at the district is the Clean Water Kitsap Partnership. That's our partnership with the Kitsap Public Health District and, surface and stormwater in Kitsap. And so that funds a lot of the programs that we do at the district, including our low impact development rain garden program and some of our backyard habitat, riparian restoration program. And so the rest of the partnerships we have are kind of non-traditional for a conservation district. We work with 8 food banks at the current time, plus the Gleaning Network. We have a partnership with Washington State Department of Agriculture. And so we are the county lead for the Farm to Food Pantry program. And so we receive funding from WSDA through Rotary Harvest Against Hunger. And we take that money and we contract with farmers and we buy produce in addition to the produce that we're growing. And this year we're also spending some USDA money. And so we've been able to make a pretty sizable contribution to the small farm bottom line in Kitsap the last couple of years because we've had that funding. But right now we get about $14,000 a year for Farm to Food Pantry. And then Kitsap received a little over $100,000 from LFPA funding. And we have been spending some of that because as a conservation district, we have the relationships with the farmers. In the rest of the state, the Farm to Food Pantry lead is typically the food bank or the food pantries. And they sometimes have a hard time connecting with the farmers because farmers are busy, they won't come back, they don't know who the farmers are. And so we have been really, really successful at leveraging those dollars to impact small scale. We buy from about between 10 and 15 farmers every year. The majority of them are farming on 5 acres or less. A lot of women farmers, a lot of beginning farmers, BIPOC, LGBTQIA. And so it's a way for us to really focus the funding that we have to lift those farmers that are underrepresented in our community. Let's see, who else do we have on there? Oh, the one partnership there that is more recent is Kitsap Community Resources. One of the things that we started a couple of years ago was what we call the Farm to Freezer project. And so we have had some kind of ugly veg. And so I started what I call Food Waste Wednesday. soup out of whatever we had that we weren't able to send to the food banks because it was kind of ugly, or maybe there was some frost damage or whatever that looked like. And I realized that there was an awful lot that we could do with that extra produce. And so I applied for a WSDA resiliency grant and received it. And then COVID hit. And so we were processing soups or processing this veg into soups that we then froze and distributed to the food banks. And our primary partnership initially was restaurants, because right at the beginning of COVID, everybody was shut down. They were trying to keep people at work. And so I would show up with maybe perhaps some stuff from the food banks that they weren't able to distribute to their clients, like number 10 cans of chickpeas. And then we would have like some spinach, or, something that was like a little raggedy around the edges, or a bunch of cabbage, or whatever that looked like. And then the food bank might have like a 40-pound box of frozen chicken, all one big brick of chicken. And obviously that can't be distributed to their clients. Sometimes community meal sites can take those things and, convert them into a meal for the community. But during COVID, there was and so I would take them to the restaurateurs and I'd say, okay, so I know that this is kind of like, one of those Food Network challenges where you're given like all of this stuff and you go. But they would then look at what there was and they would turn it into these amazing soups. And so we received some funding through the Department of Ecology most recently with KCR, who does Meals on Wheels and Head Start meals. And now they're making soup for us with our AmeriCorps. And we've delivered over about 12,000 pints of soup in the last 4 years. And the community loves it. The food bank loves it. And now the food banks are starting to ask, because obviously we've been grant funded up to this point, they're starting to ask, well, how would we, if we wanted to receive more of those, what would it cost us? And then we've also taken that and we're like, okay, so if you as a farmer want to do a value added product and you want to know, like, what is it going to cost you? What are you, and so we've kind of costed that out a little bit, and we can tell them what their per unit cost is going to be depending on where they're having it processed. And so like all that we're doing really is to support the local farm community in one way, shape, or form, but we're also supporting hunger relief organizations at the same time. Yes.
Can you say again who you have that would be able to process? Is there a community kitchen, did you say?
So our health district has a list of commissary kitchens, but the relationship that we have right now is with Kitsap Community Resources.
Okay.
And they happen to be the contractor in our county for Head Start meals, because they have Head Start programs as well as Meals on Wheels.
Okay.
And so but that's unique to our county. I know that Good Roots Northwest, which used to be the former Bonnie Lake Food Bank, they have forged a relationship with the school district culinary program. We have Olympic College in our community, and their culinary program has processed some stuff for us in the past. So it really, we also have West Sound Tech, which is the vocational hub for, I believe it is like 8 or 9 school districts. And we're probably going to be negotiating with them to do some processing, but right now they're completely remodeling their facility, and their kitchen is what was just torn out. And so really, if you're interested in looking at something like this, my contact and Teddy's contact information is at the end, but I'd be happy to talk to you about like some of the ways we've leveraged funding. And we also have a couple of food banks that are in the process of capital campaigns to build new facilities, because their buildings and facilities are kind of like worn out and they were old to begin with. And one of them is talking about putting a commercial kitchen in because they want to do ready-to-eat meals, frozen ready-to-eat meals, because their clients often are working several jobs. And so they're really struggling with the same challenges that the soccer moms have. What's easy for me, what's nutritious. We did a bunch of cultural meals because we have a significant Guatemalan population in Kitsap and North Mason, and we also have a significant Filipino and South Pacific Islander population. So we have, some of our grants with WSDA focused on like developing the recipes, putting together videos and stuff for that. And here's the thing, ask questions at any point in time. This is not just like the sage on the stage, not, no. So in Kitsap, about 30% of adults are food insecure. And right now, I don't know how like tapped into the hunger communities you are in your area, but our food banks have seen unprecedented demands that have steadily increased over the last 2 years. In fact, it's gotten to the point where we used to be able to glean additional ingredients from the food banks that we would put into the soup. So I could go and I could talk to, one of the food bank managers at CK. She was actually Merlin, the one on the right there. And I would go to her and I'd be like, okay, Merlin, we have like 10 pounds of basil. And we're taking it out and we need olive oil and I need cheese. And we'll make pesto. And she would be like, okay, well, we have like 2 cases of this really expensive gourmet olive oil that we got because it was labeled wrong. And then let me go see what's in the freezer. And so she'd come out with like, 5-pound bags of grated Parmesan. That doesn't happen anymore because they are distributing. And when I first began this process, there was always food on their shelves because I would go in and I would check, I'd be delivering produce and I'd be like, hey, you have any extra bread? We'll make some bruschetta because nobody wants all of that baguette from Costco on Friday afternoons. Now, nothing. They're distributing everything that they have.
Hey, I'm coming from a really small. No. Started working. Yeah, like you're saying, space. So you start moving into.
Well, okay, so I have a really weird educational background. I have a Bachelor of Science in Animal Sciences. And then I got married and my husband was going to go to WSU because we're once a coup, always a coup. And I am old enough, mature enough that they still had a secretarial pool at WSU. And I couldn't type well enough to get into the secretarial pool. So I went back and got a master's in child and family studies. So I have this ag/social services background that is a little unique, I would have to say. And so I was already kind of connected to some of that community. But what district are you at?
Austin.
Which is one of the districts?
Northeast.
Northeast. So you guys are north of like, well, I was going to say Ponderay, Ferry. You need to go talk to Nils. So you need to go talk to Nils Johnson. He is at Rural Roots. And he is now their food security coordinator, but he was at WSU in, I think it was in Ferry or Stevens. And he started their farm to food pantry program. And he is working in your general area. And he is like the go-to guy for this. But it's, yeah, Nils. And just tell him Diane sent you because they're doing amazing. Yeah, well, and like what they're doing at, I think Snohomish has a USDA farm to school grant. And so, I mean, there's a lot of different ways that you can leverage funding for this sort of thing. And just because you're a small district, now I will say that, well, but somebody in your community probably does. Yeah, and what I would say is that when, and it was 2019, spring of 2019, NACD was at their national conference, was doing a big to-do about urban ag because they had a bunch of these grants out and they wanted to see what people were doing. And so we went to San Antonio and we presented about the GRACE program. And what really amazed me was the absolute diversity of the types of programs. I mean, some of them were really tiny rural districts and they partnered with a church and they had, they just started a community garden in a church. One was Cleveland, Ohio, which had a huge urban agriculture program, even though they were a completely urbanized district. And their main focus had always been like water quality and stormwater runoff. So, I mean, just because you're a small district, don't think, oh, we would never want to apply for an NACD grant. No. Reach out to some of the, because if you look at them, if you look at their website and you look at the map and see how well represented like Washington State is in those applications, just reach out to one of those districts and say, hey, you know what? We'd like to do this. Can you give us a hand? It usually opens sometime November, December. It's usually due in February. But yeah, I mean, I would encourage you to apply because it's an easy grant. They give you $50,000. They send you a check. There's no match. They just want you to do something really good with it and report on it. Like, it is the best grant ever. Okay, so we grow about 20,000 pounds a year. In fact, 19,955. 2 boxes of squash would have done it, right? And we were over 20,000 pounds the year before. But when we actually ran the numbers, I'm like, seriously, we didn't. But we and then we bought with Farm to Food Pantry, we bought about another 23,000 pounds, 24,000 pounds of local produce. And we pay basically almost farmers market retail for that, because we think it's really important that farmers receive the value for their product. And if we try and undercut, what we basically end up with is the kale that they can't sell at the farmers market. And so like a number of our farmer food banks have relationships with the farmers that at the farmers markets. And so after the market, they'll go around and, you know, and they're like, would you be willing to donate? You know, and we'll write you a receipt for taxes. And I'm like, no, if you're sending them stuff, we'll get you a contract for Farm to Food Pantry and we will pay you for that produce. So the food banks don't think they're being donated, but the farmers are getting checks from us. So, yeah. And then, you know, last year we did about 3,300 pints of soup. So, and we grow beautiful veg. So really the keys to what we do is right there. We engage the community. We provide them with technical assistance. We provide them with like techniques and tools. We provide resources for growers, lots of which Teddy is going to talk about. We do education and this is actually a workshop on lettuce bowls at KCR. They do what's called the Healthy Living Series. And so, you know, it's a 6-week series. And I go and I take potting soil and I take some starts from our garden. And because you know, everybody who works in conservation that plants stuff, you have pots, right? And so we plant lettuce bowls. And I try and tell them, no, you don't want to put 40 lettuce starts in there, just 3. Trust me, it's enough. And then, you know, so they can, you know, they might not have access to, but they can grow on their patio. And then I can send them home with some more seeds and a little bit of nutrient and like really work at ways to make it as accessible as possible. And then we grow cultural foods as well. We focus on foods that are culturally relevant. So we do a lot of Asian greens. We grow a lot of garlic. And it's kind of my baby because Teddy is allergic to garlic. Just a little bit. And so we produce about 500 pounds of garlic a year. And from a grocery rescue point of view, when you think about it, the food banks, they go to the grocery stores and they get like produce close to the pull date. But garlic doesn't really go bad until it really goes bad, right? It's not like boxes of pre-made salad that's got a date, a pull by date on it, and they send it out like 2 days before that, right? And so garlic is one of those things that the Hispanic and Asian and other, you know, community groups really value. And so we grow a lot of it. And we encourage, one of the things that we do too, is that we encourage the community gardens and the grow row programs and all those folks to plant the things that are nutrient dense, because Nils has done a whole bunch of research on this. So they're nutrient dense, they're culturally preferred, and they are highly desired by the clients of the food banks. So, yes.
You were talking about the kinds of soups you're making in different, like, you know, some vegetables might have frost damage, some might have, you know, some other issues. And I was just wondering, when you're using food like that, have you all like ever turned away food, or is there some process you have to go through to say this isn't good enough for, you know?
So if it can be trimmed, right? There is a lot of ugly veg out there, and the food banks may get, you know, when they go and do grocery rescue, they may just get bins because they go through the produce department, right? And they're pulling stuff. And it might be, you know, it might be just something with a bruise. It might be a carrot that's a little wilted. If it's rotten, it goes out. But it might not be able to be distributed. And so one of the things that most of our food banks focus on, some of them are not quite there yet, but they focus on providing their clients with a dignified shopping experience that is just like going to a supermarket. They get to select the things that they want. They don't just get a box. Because when you just get a box, there's stuff in it that you don't want, and you waste it, or maybe you pass it on to a neighbor, or you put it in a little pantry that you might be in your neighborhood, which is why there is so many packages of USDA dry beans in those little pantries. And so we work really hard to like cut down on food waste and those kinds of things. With regard to processing, there's some regulations. Now, everything that we do is covered under Good Samaritan. And so some of the, if you are processing for retail sales, there are some very specific things that you need to do. You have to have traceability, for example, of all of your ingredients. And you have to have a HACCP plan. You have to do all of those kinds of things. We have all of those things in place. But one of the things about traceability is if I'm buying produce from Charlie's Produce, I have traceability from the grower to Charlie's through the distribution to my site. With the food bank, I have no idea where it's come from the time that it got to the grocery store. I mean, is it grocery rescue? Which distributor brought it? So that's the one area where it's kind of like squishy in terms of like FDA regs. We're very careful. Every batch has, it's processed in a health district inspecting kitchen. It's, they're very careful about all of their practices. It's all labeled for allergens and all of the rest of it per the regulations. It's just that traceability piece is a little squishy. And so if we were to like monetize it and buy like a buy one, give one, all of the produce that we sourced for the buy one side, we would have to follow those for the retail sale of food. But yeah, so we do a lot of demonstration. One of the things that we're very fortunate is that our district owns the land that we're on. And so we have about 4.5 acres, a lot of it, which is in demonstration projects, which you're going to be able to see when Teddy starts talking. But of all of our practices, like we have a rain garden, we have cisterns to collect rainwater, we have composts, we have a compost bin, and we have a green roof. All of those things that we do out in the community, you can come and see at the district, as well as the food bank farm. And so that is like an important piece of what we're doing, because we're demonstrating how this stuff works, what it looks like in practice, and encouraging people to adopt that. Yes. Well, after 9/11, we were co-located with USDA. And after 9/11, there was all the security protocols that came into place. Some of you may have been in offices where you had to because they're government agency, right? And we decided, this is not working for us very well. And so instead of going and renting an office location, we started looking around, and one of our district cooperators is a real estate agent. And he's like, well, there's this, it's a house, but it's big and it could be, and so we bought the house and converted it into an office, and it has an orchard. And I mean, it's a beautiful location. I mean, you can see from our aerial. Well, part of our district budget is going to go to rent, or it could go to a mortgage payment. And so we just applied it to a mortgage payment. And then in 2008, when the market kind of tanked, the piece of property next to us came up for sale too, which is what we're growing on right now. And it's got mixed commercial and rural residential zoning, and so we can grow on it. And so the plan originally was like, we're gonna build an office on that because, it is a house and kind of getting a little crowded and, that was the 5-year plan like 10 years ago. So I don't know, at some point, maybe we might put an office on what is now our pumpkin patch, but for now, we have that. And we also like resources like our tree sale and all of those kinds of things help us to, have that option here at the district. So now I'm going to turn it over to Teddy, and we have a lot of slides, but a lot of them are just visual, so you're not going to be like texted out here.
All right. So we've got a ton of slides, and the whole point of my part is how things that can be implemented on a small farm, practices that are cheap, like not being afraid of duct tape and clamps, because they work, and we'll see how far we get through all these. Also, feel free to be like, I can't hear you, or tell me more questions. All that's good. So we have a picture of seeds. Most of the seeds that I buy right now are from Johnny's, just because of disease resistance. It's easy for me to go through and track when I go back through to we're tracking weights, so I know exactly how much these carrots were. Everything's all in one spot, makes it easier because time disappears very fast. This is a beautiful little house inside a high tunnel. This was kind of our first prop house or propagation space. We needed somewhere to start our tomatoes, peppers, spring brassicas, and we had nowhere that was like controlled enough. So this is a Costco carport, put pieces together, clamp them together, drop them, clamps, duct tape, cheap stuff that if somebody doesn't have money or a ton of money, you could afford to put this together. So that's inside a closed high tunnel. There's some heaters in there just for nighttime, seat mats, and it worked really well. It was actually really fun to put together. So it's really cozy. Another one, some lights on heat mats, drop cloth, very thin. When we first started, we still don't have a ton of money, but being inventive on the ways we did things. And a little timer on the corner just to turn the heat mats on and off because the power would blow because we didn't have enough amps in there. So I had to time things correctly a little bit. And this is the prop space, the smaller tunnel next to our high tunnel in the original picture. Diane likes to call it my Christmas present because I kept bugging her about like, oh yeah, we could really use another space. And then all of a sudden we did it, and I was like, oh, okay. So we do a pumpkin patch for funds, and we have during a tree sale. We have a little vegetable cell as well. So that over a couple of years was some of the funds that helped to buy this propagation space. And remake over the starts at night. Let's see. Yeah. And there's a curtain in the center. That's just the old, we had a farmer that lost one of their high tunnels in the windstorm. So just cut out some pieces of that and clamped it over the arch. And so whenever I need to open up space to that just put some clamps back down, cinder blocks on the bottom. It's very basic, but it works. Let's see. Yeah, another picture of that. And these are one of the ways we make some money for the program is during our annual tree sale, we do sell 6 packs of vegetable starts for the time of year. Some solid trays for bottom water and speed things up. On the left is a wind strip that we bought 2 wind strips this year because they're like $15 each. So I tried a 128 cell and 72 cell because I was like, okay, let's see what these are about. They're very good at air pruning, so I've been very happy with them so far. and more lettuce from the greenhouse right now. We have a tool on top, which, is not its original intended purpose. It is very good at keeping out birds that like to eat little starts, especially lettuce. They love the lettuce. Soil blocker, how we originally started, switched over to cell trays just for speed and efficiency. Got a Jane seeder last year, which really took some time to implement into the system, but it's helped a lot. Yeah, this is winter, early spring. So we have, simple hoops that we made from, bought a giant roll at a box store. Let's see, spinach. Our high tunnel was unfortunately spaced a little further, and we didn't put in a trellising system for tomatoes, so we have to actually drive in these 10-foot T-posts, which is a good workout, but it isn't the most efficient use of time. So make sure your high tunnel is spaced for trellising. But it is a good. The AmeriCorps seem to enjoy it for like first 20 minutes.
It's an upper body workout. That really.
Yeah.
We grow. I think last year we grew about 2,000 pounds of tomatoes. Really rotating tomatoes, basil, cucumbers, peppers in there. So this is the example of super cheap and kind of expensive, which wasn't on purpose. It was just the tools that were hanging out before we came here. But the broth fork there is from Never Sink Farms. It's a $289 broth fork. I just knew I needed a new one because the old one was flexing, and it was built by someone who worked for us. And so used some funds for that. It was very fantastic. It makes broth forking so much easier, or aerating your soil. And then in the center is the cheapest tool you can make. It's a wire weeder made with the very excess, like the last bit from our hoops. Just a tiny, maybe foot long piece bent duct tape. And it's my favorite tool actually, because if it breaks, I can fix it in like a minute. It's very efficient. And as long as you get to the weeds in time, catch them at thread state, it's perfect. Yeah. Silage tarps. This is just another quick thing where I've seen, sure many of you have seen silage tarps, people use them for the entire field. I saw something on channel once where somebody actually just cut it to bed. So say if you need to turn one bed over, you can just leave the silage tarp rolled up in the front of your bed, roll it out, if you're trying to do successions of radishes or something, you could take the first fourth off, 2 weeks from then. It's kind of, we make our own compost. I think we do about 10 yards a year. Go to our local coffee stands, any debris and stuff. I like to leave. We use baling twine to mark the paths. If it breaks, not a big deal. And wood chips, chip drops are pretty fantastic as well. And almost all of our irrigation is through drip tape because we use catchment. We have 11,000 gallon cisterns for irrigation. So because it's all catchment off of our high tunnel and our house office, we can't actually overhead sprinkle anything. So when it comes to lettuce, it's a little more difficult, but we get through. It's a pretty fun system.
Is that gravity fed or do you pump it?
They're pumped, yeah. It's
basically black magic that Brian designed.
Yeah, it's hard to follow tracks of like year by year. It's like, oh, put this in. right now, yeah, there's a decent pump that can push enough PSI that there's no issues at all for like 3 fields to be on at once.
Well, nice.
Luckily, so 3 years ago when we bought that, ants found it in the spring. I didn't check when I turned it on because I didn't look at why do ants go into pumps, but they did, and it was replaced. Luckily, for free. Let's see. This is one of our, so we are a demonstration farm as well. It's kind of one of the things we go off of. So there are several different practices throughout the entire farm. We have 3 fields that are minimal tillage. We have, and then 3 fields that are conventional with a tiller. We use silage starts, we use landscape fabric here and there to demonstrate to somebody who's, not everybody wants to go out and buy a Jane for $650 plus all the seedings, like wheels. So it's a chance for somebody to see how it's used, to implement it, things that there's a lot of really cool videos online. Like, should I really buy a $400 coat or something? It's a chance to go through those options. And yeah, these are our peppers last year. Simple. The T-posts in here are reclaimed from, I think, a county job. They were tearing something out, and they were just grabbing T-post and bent them back with probably a tractor. I was there. Oh, I wasn't there. That's pretty convenient for us. Kind of the backside of the office. And then this is one of our volunteers, Leona. You want to know what's her name?
Sure.
Okay.
So we have, as of COVID, so I'm gonna go back there just a second. You'll notice that we have a lot of row cover. This was taken like 3 days ago. So this is broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage. And then there's, just kind of like the back view of the house and the high tunnel. But we use row cover because we're also organic, not certified organic, but we use organic methods. And so if you don't use some sort of exclusion netting, you're going to end up with cabbage maggots, and you're going to end up with cabbage maggot fly. And 3 years ago, we had a beautiful field. These were planted right after in March, right after our tree sale. And we had done that, and they were looking great. And then all of a sudden we went up, and there was like one wilted and died, and then another, and then and you pulled them up, and they're just, the roots were just completely chewed off, and they were squirming with maggots in them. But we had a particularly warm spring, and we weren't thinking about cabbage maggots and cabbage maggot fly. They're tiny. And their first flight is usually late May, and it ended up being early May. And so we weren't prepared for it. We lost about 30% of the plants. And so I guess we remade everything. So now everything has remade just to keep the bugs out. And so Leona, who is one of our volunteers, she's Hawaiian, and she comes on Wednesday. Apparently yesterday she had cataract surgery. She's over 70. You would never know it. But she's like, I won't be able to be there this week because I just had cataract surgery. I'll be there next week. And so every time she comes, she tells us about what she's doing. And this is a picture from her social media. And you'll see she's using hoops, she's using row cover, she's using all of the techniques that she's learned while volunteering with us. And so, one of the things that we emphasize with our volunteers is serve and learn, because we'll help you really up your game. And that is like a huge piece of what we want to do. And so I think I ought to put Rebecca on for the urban ag thing, because she's got it going on there. And yeah, in fact, we try and have something to harvest every month of the year, and we had planted purple sprouting broccoli, and we got the frost cold, and it killed all of our terrain. And Leona's didn't die. We had given her some starts, didn't die. So, this is our zucchini field. We do use some landscape fabric. But, we try not to use a lot of plastic. Because plastic in ag is like, I mean, microplastics are an issue. A few years ago, we have all of our tools hanging for the backyard hanging in a shed, and the robin came in and had started building a nest. And I'm like, honey, you can't like make a nest there because they're gonna come in and they're gonna take that rake and they're gonna just dump you on the ground. And so I had moved the nest, and when I took it down, I realized that about over half of the material that the robin had used to start building her nest was plastic. And we're really careful about it, but you know, we have some shrink wrap around our grid, and we have the odd blue tarp. And it had just picked up this plastic just from around our district. And I was like, that was a real wake-up call. And so we do use the landscape fabric, and we use the flame leader and we burn holes. I had a lot of fun with that. But this is where our zucchini is planted. But we also work with a bunch of community gardens. And one of the community gardens that we work with, their garden was a hot mess a couple of years ago. This is Dan Larson's garden. He works with the Kitsap Juvenile and Family Court. And he's a certified teacher. And one of the things that he does is he teaches the kids who have been expelled from school, but still have to go to school because they're still teenagers, right? And so he has these kids, and you know, they do all of the reading, writing, arithmetic, but he also takes them out. This is actually a county park called Howe Farm, which is a farmland preservation failure, but it has a dog park on it now, and it has its garden. And he was having a heck of a time, but he comes and he sees what we're doing, and he's like, yeah, we could do that. And so that's what his garden looked like the other day. And he picked up starts. What did he get? He got
like flats of zucchini, some lettuce, tomatoes, peppers, you know, all the fun stuff.
Yeah, and so we have extra, we start extra, and we pass them along to these community gardens. Most of the kids that are, you know, with him, they're food insecure as well. And so it's kind of cool for them. They get to harvest, they get to take them home to their families. And the other half of this garden is actually the veterans garden that is run by the Gleaning Network. And when I talked to the person at the Gleaning Network, and I said, so how's your garden growing? And she's like, oh, I'm tough. But when I went, I was like, it looks pretty good. And so what has happened is a master gardener has taken over as the garden lead on that project. And so it actually looks really good. They've had it tilled, they've got fencing around it, and they share that space with Dan. And so I went looking for, you know, like a good bad example, and I got all for good examples. So I was excited about that. Okay, so Tate's gonna talk a little bit about his proud school Google Sheets now.
Yeah, Google Sheets is great. Yeah, it's one of the things I wanted to track was actually like how much of everything we are growing. Not just a total pound, because that sounds great, 20,000 sounds, it's a fun number. And it means something. But knowing like if it's a difference between 20,000 pounds of squash or lettuce, that's totally different. So I definitely spent several hours in the winters trying to figure out how to do exactly what I wanted. But yeah, our tracking system, it's very simple now. I have a laptop set up. It's like a day. You can find everything's inventoried already, so you just hit tab, hit button, and you find your radishes with tops or without. There's also a really fun something's messed up, but it's covered by the video, so actually that's okay. No, you don't have to show it.
Oh, that's fine.
I think it's up there.
That.
It's still there.
Yeah, there was just an error in
There for you.
No, I fixed it.
Oh, you fixed it?
I fixed it.
Oh, well, do but yeah, I mean, because it is as somebody's putting in the weights, somebody put like 886 instead of 86 or something. They were, I was just fixing.
Yeah, I just, this is just a screenshot. So we have, we track everything by weight, by food bank. And it allows us to like look at where were our crop successes, where were our failures. Purple sprouting broccoli. I think purple sprouting broccoli in theory is a really cool thing. But it takes quite a bit of energy, it takes quite a bit of space. Brassicas require crop rotation, and so it, you know, you have to put it into the crop rotation. And it gets stinky because I mean we get a lot of rain and anyway. It is not always the bounty that you're going to be harvesting in February that you think you are. And so if we know how many pounds we harvest, it allows us to really decide, is that a worthwhile investment in time? And last year, I think was it was like, okay, this is the final year. If we don't get a great harvest in the spring, we're not doing purple sprouting broccoli again. And so I think we might be done with purple sprouting broccoli. It's a long day. It's like 200 days long, as opposed to regular broccoli, which is like 55, 60. And it's available for harvest in February, but you know, you have to plant it in like July. You know, we're trying to turn over beds very frequently. And so because we grow year round, because we have the tunnel, what did we have for purple sprouting broccoli last year? Like 250 pounds? We had 500 pounds of spinach out of the high tunnel this spring. Guess what we're gonna do in the high tunnel next year? Spinach. So yeah, the other thing that we've done with our record keeping is it allows us to share this information with the food banks. And one thing I will say is, if you listened in on the Harvest Pierce conversation, they talk about partnerships, and partnerships are great, but I will say that showing up and building trust is a really important part of those partnerships. When we got the first grant, the first NACD grant, we were doing, I was doing workshops at the local food bank, and I showed up and I'm like, hey, I'm very enthusiastic. We're doing workshops. We'll do workshops for gardening for your clients. It's going to be so cool. And the rather jaded manager of the food bank warehouse looked at me and we're like, we're going to do this and we'll be here, you know, we'll do it every year. And she's like, we'll see if you're here next year. I was like, okay. But you know, I've worked in the nonprofit space before, and I know the perils of soft money. And if you're funding a program exclusively with soft money and grants, you know, you might have a grant one year that allows you to do something, and then you finish that grant. Maybe it's a 2-year grant, so it's even better. But then you finish that grant, but then you apply for another grant that allows you to do basically the same thing, but not exactly the same thing. And so you're kind of playing this shell game with your partners all the time. And one of the challenges with an organization that is providing services to vulnerable community members is that there's a lot of insecurity and uncertainty in their lives already. And a lot of times that gets magnified to the organizations that are serving them. And so some of the food banks have more strategic approaches to life. Some of them are more coordinated in their community responses. Some of them are a hot mess. And that they're kind of chaotic, and then that translates to their service model, because if you're in a chaotic place and you've got people that are like nervous, anxious, and insecure about where their next meal is coming from, that doesn't create a feeling of trust or safety. And so one of the things that we have just focused on is being consistent, showing up, and being as transparent as possible. And so like right now I'm starting to get texts from farmers. I got a text this morning from a farmer. She's like, okay, we got lettuce. How much do you want? I'm like, I don't know how much you got. And she's like, well, a lot. Because of course it's been cold and now it's all coming on at once. And I said, well, I don't know, we do 15 heads to a crate, and how about 2 to 3 crates? And she sent me a text, which is her version of an invoice, you know, 44 heads, $4 a head. And so I'll probably put it on some sort of invoice thing, and we'll pay her for part food pantry. But she's going to take it to one food bank that we typically don't serve with our produce donations. But I want to make sure that everybody gets about the same amount of produce. because we want to be as equitable on our distribution as possible. And so if we keep really good records, and if the gleaning network keeps very similar records, we're really able to have comparable data that allows us to say, you know, here's the impact that we're making in the hunger relief system. Now, I mean, last year, there was almost 50,000 pounds of fresh produce, plus the gleaning network probably worked through about another 20,000 pounds of tree fruit. And you're like, wow, that's like 68,000 pounds. That's a lot of food. But that actually is about 0.5% of the total pounds of food that our food banks in Kitsap gave away last year. So we're not like saving the world, but we're making an impact because we're providing them with healthy choices. And so that is kind of our goal. What's next? Oh, so we have some successes. This is the Kingston Firehouse Garden. It's a couple of volunteers. They have a garden at the firehouse in Kingston, Washington. And in 2020, they produced 330 pounds. And you can see they've got some raised beds there. And so he messaged me, he's like, okay, we're having trouble. And so this was just like technical assistance just by email. I'm like, well, what are you doing? And he's like, well, we're growing in raised beds. And I said, why aren't you growing in the dirt? I pulled the web soil survey and I looked at what they had there and I'm like, you actually have really, first they built the fire hall on prime soils. So I said, you've got really excellent soils there. Amend it properly, you can grow in the dirt. And so they have a raised bed, obviously because those raised beds give you a bit of an advantage in the spring. Your soil's a little warmer, they use quite a bit of compost. And you can see what a difference it's made in the and they donate to ShareNet. They're able to, 755 pounds, it's not a lot, but it's all highly desirable leafy greens. They grow quite a bit of garlic too. The other thing that we've done is we've made that shift. I mean, when Teddy was talking about, you're showing the pictures of the high tunnel, we used to do tomatoes in the summer, and then we would do something green onions, some spinach, whatever. And we like really intensified our greens game. And so we have a greens harvester. Looks kind of like the bagger on a lawnmower with a knife attached that you run with a drill, and you just go along the bed and then dump it in a bin, and then you bag it. And it looks just like the salad that you have in the grocery store. Obviously, it's not ready to eat, but most people would. It's organic. We've washed it. And so leafy greens for farmers are worth between $9 and $10 a pound at the farmers market. And so we costed it out. Okay, so if you go to NRCS and you get a high tunnel and you want to invest in that process and you want to grow year round and you want to do something like leafy greens, you do need the Jang, because the Jang precision seeder is what allows you to do the leafy greens most efficiently. And so your infrastructure expenses, obviously, if you go and you get the grant for the high tunnels, you've got your big piece of infrastructure, but then you need your equipment. But then you look at the Jang and you look at your ability, to wash it and dry it. We use a spin dryer that's actually a swimsuit dryer that I bought it off. You should put like mesh bags with the lettuce in it. But what we did is then we priced it out and we created a crop budget and said, okay, if you're a small farmer and you want to do a high value crop that you can be really efficient about, say you have a side gig, right? You work full time and you want to farm as like an additional source of income, or maybe you want to transition to full-time farming once you decide to quit your Google job or your Amazon job, but you want to get your foot in the door to begin with. Here's how much you can make in a high tunnel that's 30 by 96. Here's how much your fixed costs are going to be for the equipment that you need. And here's what your variable costs are going to be, things like soil amendment and that sort of thing. And here's your income piece. And you can generate about 15 to 20,000. I think that was the number that we had. Out of a high tunnel, just on leafy greens. So we're able to tell the farmers, you know what, you can make money at this. And here's your your payoff timeline on your Jang, your broadboard and those kinds of those pieces of equipment for that small acreage, small scale. So this is one of our success stories. Another one is one of the other food banks they call the Share and Care Garden. It's about a quarter of an acre. They produce 6,376 pounds. And it's just like three ladies who are in their 60s that decided that they wanted to grow food for the food bank. And in fact, they had messaged us and they're like, wow, we're really going through lettuce. Do you have a couple of trays of lettuce starts for us? Come see us on Thursday. We also learned from the people that we serve. This is Troy, and Troy is talking to us about collard trees. Anybody here know what a collard tree is? You do. It's the darling of the permaculture set. But it's also a cultural food for the African American community. And they had some of them growing at one of the food banks, and Troy takes care of them, and then she takes them and plants them in her neighbors' yards, and so all of her neighbors have greens all winter long. And basically, it looks like a collard that's gone to seed, only it never goes to seed. And so we now have 2 rows of collards on the collard trees. And basically, they just sucker, and when one of them breaks off, you just stick it in the ground and it roots, and you got another tree. And so we've also been able to share them with other members of the community. One of our local farmers did like a gardening class, and she came and got a bunch of them. She's like, I need to be able to defray my costs. And I'm like, well, we can't sell them. I mean, we'll give them to you if you can give them away. She's like, oh, totally. And so she came and got a whole bunch of the suckers off of them. And we harvest it all winter long, so that there are leafy greens all winter long. And they're really good collards. Do they have rice collards?
Do they take over?
No, they just get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. The wind, we had a lot of wind a little while ago, and a bunch of it broke off. So I need to get a hold of some folks and be like, look, they're still kind of attached to the plant, so they're not. But then if you want to propagate a bunch, come get them. Because I think we have enough. We have 2, what are they, like 50, 60 foot rows?
Yeah. The first time we did it, the success rate is supposed to be like 25% sometimes, but we had like 85% success rate.
Yes.
I planted them like very close together. I was like, I'll pin them, and then I didn't have to pin them, and they still.
But they have trunks on them. And if you don't top them, they'll just continue to get tall. So you do have to top them. But yeah, so
Where do you find them?
well, we got them from Troy at the food bank. But I mean, you can buy them online, or if you're over in Western Washington, you can get them at local location. You just stick them in the dirt. This is another one of our success stories, though it might not look successful. This is the Olympic College Residence Hall, and they have this little teeny alley, and the Residence Hall manager there's a lot of Asian students that live there, and they wanted to do some gardening. And so during COVID, we arranged we had a local topsoil company. They had a bunch of compost they were donating to community gardens, and so we went and took a district vehicle and got it. And this is the beginning, and here's what it looks like now. And you're like, oh, that looks kind of like a bit of a mess. But that is a food forest for them. And every one of those 5-gallon buckets has an edible item in it, and they harvest it on the reg. And basically all we did is we gave them some seeds and some start. And I have a restaurant that they put pickles in all their sandwiches. And so they've got basically an unlimited supply of 5-gallon buckets. And we just got hooked up with a pet food bakery. And so we're getting buckets from them too, which is really handy because we also use those buckets to go and get coffee grounds to make our compost. 12% nitrogen on a dry matter basis. So there you go. Here's one of the food bank, and it has a raised bed garden. And so here's the caveat in working in the community spaces with other organizations. We go and support several food banks to plant their garden beds. And so we went with the AmeriCorps and we planted it, and I just happened to be there dropping off food one day, and so I took a picture. We planted some radishes, we had some brassicas. That looks pretty good, right? That, like 3 months later, this is what it looked like. Here's another one of them. And we planted that a couple months earlier. And so you look at that and you're like, okay, probably don't want to do that again, but they're in the food bank business. They're not in the gardening business. And sometimes they have a volunteer like Paula and Lee, who have the Care and Share Garden, that have the knowledge, the skills, and the abilities to do the thing that gives you 6,500 pounds of fresh veg. And sometimes they don't have enough volunteers to help them distribute the food that they are getting through grocery lists. And so we really have to meet your partners where they're at. And so every spring we go, we clean up the beds, we take a little soil amendment, we plant them, and we take some plant starts, and we take a couple of zucchini and stick it in there, and we try and maintain that relationship and connect with them. But that is one. If you're working with community gardens and community spaces, I mean, everybody talks about all the success stories, and they're not always a complete success. And that's just the way it is. And so you just keep trying, and you keep showing up, and you keep educating, and you keep like maybe connecting them. And so, somebody will say, well, if we just had a volunteer. And so then I call up my friend who works at WSU and I say, okay, do you have a master gardener that has some time on their hands that lives in that area? And sometimes they'll be like, yeah, sure. And the next thing you know, you've got a master gardener over there, and they're like, oh my gosh, what are we gonna do with all this produce? So that's the power of those partnerships, is that sometimes you can connect people and sometimes you can't. And this is kind of the payoff. So one of the things that Farm to Food Pantry does is they have grower appreciation cards. And this is one from a couple of years ago. And we had a volunteer that had gone to the food. We just dropped the cards off at the food banks, and the volunteer was like, hey, do you want to say something nice to one of the farmers that grew this food? And there it is. And then we scan those and we send them to the farmers who are part of our Farm to Food Pantry program. And so they receive this thanks for the beautiful food that they grow. And so I'm hoping this helps you with your urban ag program being successful. See what I did there? There's our contact information. Is there any questions? I mean, we kind of like ripped through that. So you guys are all gonna like rush out and start an urban ag program?
I appreciate the following up on the end that, it isn't always hearts and unicorns and butterflies, that, we've had some folks, like when you have that volunteer who's passionate and puts the time in, but then you do have kind of these ebbs and flows, and that's okay, as long as you still keep trying to build that community and that relationship and trying your path. But at some point when time and money is so finite and precious, like when should somebody wait to restart in the future, or when you really dig in? Like, those are my two questions.
Well, I mean, it's tough, right? So I mentioned that we went to NACD and we presented on the Grace Project and first grant. And I mean, in some ways we shouldn't have presented then, we should go now and be like, okay, it looked like we were kind of awesome then, and we had like this really awesome story because we had the women from Mission Creek. And they felt so passionately, because most of them had come from food insecure experiences, and they felt so honored and always said, I never got anything like this when I went to the food bank. And they're just, the food that they like packaged and got, because they couldn't go to the food banks, they just served at our location, was put together with so much love. And and so I mean that there was all the feels associated with that, but I mean, I think this is more representative of a slightly more mature program.
It seems much more sustainable.
Well, and part of it is that our district has chosen to fund it.
Right.
And because I have a nose for money. And so I've been very successful at leveraging funding. And Teddy came to us as an AmeriCorps at the beginning of March in COVID. And served basically a term and a half. And then we were able to bring him on as a staff member. In fact, he and another AmeriCorps that was serving in our rain garden program, we hired both of them at that time. And part of the reason we were able to hire them is that I heard that there was gonna be some commerce money for some new positions. And that was coming through the EDCs, and I'm like, we want some of that money. It was for food security, and so I think like half of your first year salary was paid for by that funding source. And so that's the other power of your partnerships, right? Is that if you are really a partner and you're very gracious and you pass along grant opportunities that maybe aren't great for you, but might be great for somebody else, people will think of you and go, hey, I thought of you for this. And so that has been very powerful. But like when I talked about like Cleveland, and one of the things that had happened is that in the lead up to 2008, they had had a bunch of brownfields and a bunch of abandoned buildings in neighborhoods in Detroit similarly. And so the city had gone through and they demoed a bunch of that, but they converted those to urban ag spaces. And so they had a lot of community members there that they hooked up with the NRCS, and they had a whole bunch of tunnels, like 8 or 9 of them. And when she came to do her presentation about their NACD units, she's like, most of those tunnels are empty right now because there wasn't sufficient follow-up and investment from the district or whoever had been, because those community members needed quite a bit of support. They had instability in family relationships, something bad happened, they had to move, it was an older family member and they got ill and there was nobody to pick it up. I mean, whatever it happened to be, right? And so they were like looking at revitalizing those, and you know, they were taking over basically NRCS. And so you know, when that food bank manager said, well, we'll see if you're here and here. I mean, I wasn't terribly, I mean, at first I was like, oh, that's kind of harsh, but I wasn't offended by it because I knew where she was coming from. And there's, I mean, that, okay, it's been since 2017 and we've continued to show up. And there's still a few of them that are like, we'll take your free food, but I mean, and my girlfriend, she jokingly refers to the funding circle around food security as Hunger Games. Because they're incredibly competitive.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that Harvest Pierce mentioned is that we don't go for small grants anymore. But like our banks, we have Kitsap Bank, we have Community Federal, and they have like little $5,000 grants. And I used to apply for those because we weren't getting as much through Farm and Food Pantry. We were getting like 5,000 or 6,000, so we could add on to that. I don't apply for those anymore because the food banks all apply for those. And I really don't want to compete with my food banks. Because if there is a relationship, like with KCR, to apply for that Department of Ecology Public Participation Grant, which comes around every 2 years, and it's only available for individuals and nonprofits. Government agencies can't apply. And I had this program all ready to go. And so 3 years ago, I had it all packaged up and I went to my food bank partner and said, I need a nonprofit. Can you apply? I'll write the application. All you have to do is it's kind of like grants.gov, only it's the Eagle through, yeah. And you have to create the account. Well, they got really busy and he hadn't done it. And I'm like, can you get to it? And he's like, oh, I'm sorry, I can't. And I'm thinking, there's $160,000 over the next 2 years that we could be spending to do this. It's okay. And so then I was talking to somebody at KCR and they're like, well, we're nonprofit, we could do it. But there was like 3 days before the deadline. Okay. So I guess we're gonna wait another 2 years. So I mean, I waited like almost 5, 6 years to apply for that public participation grant. And I had it all written and I basically delivered it to them. They applied, they're the fiscal lead on it, which makes my fiscal guy so much happier because he doesn't have to write checks to every restaurant and every service provider in the community. And they, I mean, they're doing amazing things with it. So, yeah. I mean, it's like, it's challenging when partners flake out on you. And it's challenging when people don't follow through, and it's challenging when people like maybe lack the skills. But part of our job is to support people so that they don't pay. Whether it's farmers, whether it's landowners, whatever it is, right? That's kind of what we need to do when we show up is help them so that they can be successful.
So, you seem to be working a lot with food banks, food pantries, and that sort of thing. Are there other community groups that you found have been good partners, churches or school gardens, that sort of thing?
We haven't been in that space that much because like the gleaning program, they have what they call the grower. And if I were in charge of the world, I'd run it differently. But it's kind of their baby. And so they have grow row captains that connect in their community. They have donation tables and they're supposed to be, you know, like getting local home gardeners plant a row for the gleaning program because they distribute to a low income and senior housing institute. And they often want plant starts in the spring. And so we're like, okay, we can do, you know, like it's a good succession crop, 45 days, every 45 days. And I can't tell you the number of times that we've like, okay, we start the season and we're like, okay, here's the, you know, and here's kind of like, so in 45 days, we'll be seeing you again. And we don't hear from him, in the middle of July, they're like, hey, we need 3 trays of lettuce.
Or tomatoes and peppers, so take a couple months. But you know, that's the biggest thing we've done this year is actually grow, like starts. Several 72 6-packs. Yeah, it used to be that the extras we would give away, and now we actually start extras and then try to get people to actually like contact us. And they're like, oh yeah, we could have used those. Yeah, for sure. So it's still building the start thing, but it's better than some of the starts that some of the community gardens get from Boxer, for instance.
And so, I mean, our goal is to increase the health of our community, help them conserve natural resources, all of those kinds of things. And we have some specific expertise that allow us to do it very efficiently. And because we have the tools to do it on a larger scale. But like when I go do the lettuce bowl class, I also take like a couple of clear plastic clamshells and they're going to start their lettuce. We give them the starts and they put them in the lettuce bowl. And then I give them a clamshell, put a little soil in the bottom, we put like 4 lettuce seeds in it. And I have my spray bottle and I spritz it and I'm like, okay, go put this on a windowsill and make sure it gets lots of light because some of those things that we do translate down to that micro level. And, you know, in 30 days from that transplant point, they're going to have a head of lettuce and we're going to make salad and the new one has to be put back in there. And they've seen how it's done. And so we just kind of need to keep like working on like building. And so now Dan, he's like, I'm just going to trust you to call me when you got stuff for me. Because he doesn't have like the brain space to like plan all of that. But so Teddy like texts him, hey, we're gonna have plants start saying sweet for you. Got lettuce for you, you know. I mean, in some ways it's almost easier to do that. It's like, oh thanks, and he shows up and picks him up and off he goes. And, I mean, that in some ways you just really have to meet people where they're at. And you know that with landowners too, whether if you're doing a riparian area, you got one landowner in the middle of this stretch of 5 parcels and anything to do with like, okay, we'll do the parcels on either side. And when they see how awesome it looks, maybe they'll ask us to come and do their parcels. And sometimes they won't. And sometimes we wait, they pass away and their kids inherit and they're like, yeah, we're so excited. Could you come do ours too? So there's that. Any other questions? Okay, so